Hi, so this is Unit 1, January 2017. So let's start. Number 1. Which of the following expresses the joule in base units? So the joule is a type of energy, right? So in Unit 1, we have three type of energies, which is work done, which is force into distance, and we have kinetic energy. The kinetic energy is the energy which an object possesses when it is in motion, and there is another type of energy which is gravitational potential energy. So gravitational potential energy, we can use the gravitational potential energy here. Since gravitational potential energy, GPE is equals to mgh, right? M into g into h. So m is the mass, g is the gravity, and h is the height above which an object or anything is present below the ground. So when we have mass, the SI unit, the SI standard international unit for mass is kg, and the standard international unit for g is a form of acceleration, right? So g is meter per second squared, and h is in meters, so since it is in height. So the answer will be kg meter square second to the power minus 2. So what matches with this one? Option D. So the answer to this question is option D. Number 2. Select the graph that correctly shows the variation of an object's kinetic energy Ek with its velocity. So the mark scheme says that the option is D. Let's prove how. So we have kinetic energy, right? What is the formula of kinetic energy? Kinetic energy, Ke is equals to half mv squared. So in the y-axis we have kinetic energy, and in the x-axis we have velocity. So we can ignore half m, these we can ignore. So we can also write that Ke is proportional to v squared. So K is proportional to v squared, so when there is an exponent like this, the answer should be C or D. So why is it D? So let's consider several values for v. So if we have v here and Ke here, so we can use a few values of v. We use 1, 2, 3 and 4. So if we use the value of v as 1, so 1 square is 1. If we use the value of 2, so 2 squared is equals to 4. So kinetic energy will be 4. Here it will be 9 and 16. So what we can see is, with each increment of v, there is greater increment in kinetic energy Ke. So when we go from 1 to 2, we go from 1 to 4. When you go from 2 to 3, we go from 4 to 9. So the increments here is plus 1 and here is plus 5. Here it's plus 1 and here it's plus 3. So clearly plus 1 is greater than plus 3 and plus 1 is greater than plus 5. So it clearly shows that for each increment it will have greater increment in K. Greater increment in K, so we can say that this length is greater than this length, since the increase in V is smaller than the increase in Ek. Same goes for here. So the answer to this question is D. Number 3. A block of mass m. So we have a block of mass m and is placed on a bench. So we have a bench over here. This is the surface, and a horizontal force is F is applied to the block. So we have horizontal force F applied in this direction. The block accelerates along the branch, travels a distance d. So for example, from here to here, it travels the distance d. The block accelerates along the bench, travels a distance d, and time t reaches a velocity v. What is the work done? So work done by force F on the block. So in this case, this time is not relevant in this question, and this velocity is not relevant in this question, since work done is clearly force into distance moved from the force applied. So the distance moved from the force applied is this, and the force applied is clearly F here. So we can use this F and this D. So W equals to force into distance. So the answer to this question is A. Number 4. To travel from position A to B, so it is traveling from position A to position B. So it is traveling from here to here, and the car drives 20 kilometer due east and then 20 kilometer due south. So if we draw a compass, this is north, this is south, this is east, and this is west. So it travels due east first and then due south again. So the traveling would be due east, 20 meters due east, and then 20 meters due south. So the situation will be like this. So the question is, select the row from the table that correctly expresses the magnitude of the total distance traveled and the total displacement of the car at the end of the journey. So what is distance? Distance is basically the length of our way that we are covering, the total length that we are covering, and displacement is basically the shortest length between 2 points. So if we try to take the distance here, it will be simply 20 plus 20, since the length of way which the car is covering is simply 20 plus 20. So distance will be C or D. So displacement is the shortest way between 2 points. So the shortest way will be this, A to B. So this we can find by the Pythagorean principle, which is, if we have a triangle like this, right angle, this is the hypotenuse, and if we consider these two lengths as A and B, so we can write this as h square equals to a square plus b square. So this is quite a simple formula. So to find AB, what we have is AB squared is equals to 20 squared plus 20 squared. So AB, which is the hypotenuse, is equals to root over 20 squared plus 20 squared. So this is the option. So the answer to this question number 4 is C. Number 5 and 6. So two groups of students were asked to perform an experiment to determine the acceleration of free fall. So the acceleration by free fall, each group repeated their experiments 3 times to check the results. So repeated 3 times. So in each experiment, a steel ball fell through a height of just 1 meter, and the time for the ball to fall was measured. So we have ground here and we have a ball. We release the ball from this height, the ball will finally reach the ground at this height. So we will have the distance d and we will have the time, and we can find the velocity and anything regarding the experiment. So group 1 uses a stopwatch to measure the time. Group 2 uses light gates connected to a data logger to measure the time. So data logger is basically connected to a sensor, right? So a sensor usually senses a data, and the data is recorded by the data logger. So usually a sensor is connected to a data logger, and in the place of sensor we have light gates, which are also a kind of sensor. So number 5 says that the students measured the height of the ball fell using a meter rule. The height should be recorded as. So the precision of a meter rule is 1 millimeter. The precision of a vernier caliper is 0.1 millimeter, and the precision of a micrometer screw gauge is 0.01 millimeter. So the precision of meter rule is 1 millimeter, right? But 1 millimeter is 0.001 meter, since the value of milli is 10 to the power minus 3. So 0.001 is 3 significant figures, right? 3 significant figures. So the answer, which is in 3 significant figures, is C. In B, it is written as 2 significant figure. This is written as 2 significant figure or 2 decimal places. This is written as 3 significant figures, and this is written as a standard form. So we need 3 significant figures, and the only answer with the 3 significant figure is C. So number 6, select the row from the table that correctly describes the reliability reliability and validity of the results obtained from each group. So reliability is basically the chance, the probability of which the values that we are measuring is correct, and validity is regardless of the values being correct, if we can trust the values or not. So let us see group 1 and group 2. We have to mark the reliability and validity. So group 1 says that group 1 uses a stopwatch to measure the time. So he uses a stopwatch at the time when object passes through. He starts the stopwatch, and after a while he stops the stopwatch by himself. And group 2 says that it uses light gates connected to a data logger to measure the time. So the light gates are basically automatic. So since they are automatic, the light gates are automatic, the light gates are reliable, and group 1 is not reliable. It is because when we as humans are using the stopwatch to start and stop the time, we might have the human reaction time error, right? So for example, we can start the stopwatch 1 second or 2 seconds later than when we should have started the stopwatch. This is because we are not 100% accurate in reacting. So to this, group 1 is not reliable and group 2 is reliable because group 2 does not have any human reaction time error, because the times are recorded, the times are sensed by the light gates and recorded by a data logger. So there is no time delay between measuring the time using the light gates and recording the time using a data logger. So in this way, it is group 1 is not reliable and group 2 is reliable, right? So let's check validity. So both of them are valid. It is because in question 5 it says that each group repeated their experiment 3 times to check their results. So regardless of the methods being reliable or not, the values are valid, since there is a low chance that all three of the results that group 1 and group 2 are getting are anomalous points, right? They should not be anomalous points, since anomalous points are basically, if we plot a graph, we have something like this. We can have a plot like this. So the line of best fit would be something like this, right? But an anomalous point is this point, which does not go with the trend. So if we repeat the experiments a lot of times, we will see that this method is valid. So if we have taken the one reading, there might be a chance that we might have gotten this reading or this reading. So use the chances of getting an invalid results, we repeat the experiment. So 1 and group 2 both repeat the experiment, so they are valid. Only this row has all the 4 options correct, so the answer is C. Number 7. An object of volume 2.4 into 10 to the power minus 5 meter cube was suspended from a spring balance. So this is the spring balance that we are talking about in air, and its weight in newtons was read from the scale. So basically the reading on the scale is basically the weight of the weight of the rock or object minus the upthrust. So if we draw a free body force diagram, this should be weight and this should be the upthrust due to the water. So weight is basically W equals to mg, and upthrust is basically V rho g, where V is the volume, rho is the density, and g is the gravitational pull. W, which is weight, is equals to mass into gravity. So the change in reading would be the resultant force from this, right? So the resultant force would be W minus upthrust. W would be mg minus upthrust is V rho g. So it would be mg minus V rho g. So V volume is 2.4 into 10 to the power minus 5 into rho, the density is 1000 kg per meter cube. Here is the density written, and g is 9.81. So we can clearly see that the beginning we had mg as a reading, and when we submerge the object into the water, it is decreasing by this amount. So the correct answer to this question is this or this, since these both are the same in values. So it would be increasing or decreasing, right? It would be decreasing since we have a minus here. So the answer to this question is B. Number 8. A uniform rod is found to balance when a pivot is placed at midpoint O as shown. So these two parts are identical. They have the same mass, same length in either side of the pivot. So the rod is replaced with one made from two different materials, right? So this is a different material and this is a different material. Now the right hand half of the new rod, so this rod, this half of the rod has double the density, half the diameter of the left hand rod. So this has, the right hand side has double density but half the diameter. So this has become a thinner rod now. So where should the pivot be placed in order to balance the replacement rod? So in this case we need to find the weight in either position. Since the question is saying that the pivot has to be moved, this means that there is a moment in this direction or this direction. In either direction there is a resultant force that is causing the turning effect of a force, which is a moment. So the weight is basically W equals to mg, right? And we can write m as, since we know that density equals to mass by volume, mass will be equals to density into volume. So the mass would be equals to density into volume. The volume is the cross-sectional area into height. The cross-sectional area is pi r squared and the height is h, right? Since we have a cylinder like this is a type of cylinder, right? It has a cross-sectional area of r and height of h. So it is saying that the right hand of the rod, the new rod, has double the density but half the diameter of the left hand side of the rod. So basically left hand side, the mass of the left hand side would be density into volume. Volume is pi r square into h. So the density at the right hand side there is twice the density, so 2d into pi into the diameter is half, so radius should be halved, radius by r by 2 squared into h. So this would be 2d pi r square h by 4, which would be d r square h by 2. So d pi r square h by 2, and this is d pi r square h. So clearly the mass of the right hand side is lower than the left hand side. So we can easily say that since the mass on the left hand side is greater, since W equals to mg, since the mass is greater, W is greater. Since W is greater, we also know that moment is equals to force into distance. So in the left hand side, when the weight is greater, the force on the left hand side would be greater, but the moment has to be constant in order to balance. In order to keep the moments constant, we need to decrease the distance from the pivot. So if we place the pivot leftwards in this direction, the distance is decreasing, right? Since the distance should decrease to keep the moment constant, and since the force is increasing and we need to keep the moment constant, we need to decrease the distance from the pivot on the left hand side. Since the left hand side has a higher force will need a lower distance, and to lower the distance we need to move the pivot to the left hand side of O. So the answer to this question is B. Number 9. So this is one of the trickiest questions Edexcel set for the exam. So if you don't understand, just re-watch the section. So question 9. Concrete is used in both the spans and the supporting columns in a bridge. So this is the span, right? This is the span, and these two are the supporting columns, right? these two are the supporting columns and this is the span. So it says that in both the span and the supporting column, brick is used, right? Concrete is used, and the spans need to be reinforced with steel but not the supporting columns, right? So this means that in the span we use bricks and the concrete at the same time, and in the supporting column here we only use concrete. So what does it mean? It means that in the span, since we are using both steel and concrete, only concrete is not enough, and in the supporting column concrete is enough, we do not need steel. So we need to identify if the spans and the supporting columns are compression force or tensile force. So let's just redraw the span. So this is the span, right? This is the span, and we have two supporting columns here and here, and we also have a ground, which is like this. We have a ground. So let us see the type of force on the supporting column, the blue lines. So in the supporting column we have weight of the spans downwards. So there is weight on the span downwards in this direction, and since this is the ground, there is a reaction force upwards on the span. So there is a reaction force upwards like this. So since there are forces acting on opposite directions on the same span, it means that the span is actually under compression. Since it is under compression, it is a compression force. And let us see the span. In the span, we can see that the span is connected to the bridge at this point and this point, and there is a center of gravity acting downwards on the span from this, right? There is weight, so we can see that it will have a tendency to bend like this. For example, instead of the span, if we had a wire here, the wire would bend, right? The wire would bend. So the span here, we have a span here, and we have two supporting columns like this. So if the span tries to go from this shape to this shape, this is a type of tension force, since it is being elongated. So it means that the span is under force and the supporting columns are under compression force, right? So since the span is made of both brick and concrete, it means that the concrete cannot support the span itself. And since the span is under tensile force or is under tension, it means that concrete is weak under tension. Concrete is weak under tension, we need steel to support the span, so it is weak under tension. And since we do not need steel in the supporting column, so it means that since the supporting column is under compression, it means that concrete is strong under compression and it does not need the help of steel. So one of the simplest ways I can explain the question. So the concrete is weak under tension and strong under compression. So the answer to this question is D. Number 10. A 1.88 kg mass is suspended from the end of a spring. So for example, we have a spring like this here, and we have a mass of 1.8 kg which is suspended by the spring, and the original length is 0.040 meter. The spring extends and is now 3 times its original length. So basically the original length is 0.040 meter and the new length would be 0.040 into 3, so 1.2 meter. So what is the extension? What is the change? Change is basically 1.2 minus 0.04 meter, which is 0.8 meter. And it is asking the work done on the spring. So the work done on the spring is basically W equals to half into force into the extension del x. So this is the formula that is given in the syllabus for Edexcel Physics Unit 1. So the work done is basically half into force. What is the force? Force is basically the weight. So we have the weight here, and W is equals to mg, right? So W equals to mg, m is 1.8 and g is 9.81. 1.8 is the mass in kgs since it is in the question written here. So it is 1.8. So half into 1.8 into 9.81 into extension is 0.8. So the value comes as 0.71 joules. So 0.71 joules says in option C. So the answer is C. Guys, so if you found the video helpful, consider liking and subscribing. Hope the video helped you guys.